Hey folks, Matt Weiss here, and I am going to teach you about dynamic processing. And I believe I'm going to teach it in a way that I don't feel has ever really been taught before. And that is to think of dynamic processing, like expansion, compression, gating, limiting, as a tool that affects a sound's shape. That is the foundational principle behind what compressors, what expanders, what gates do, what transient designers do. It's all the same if you break it down to the envelope of a sound. What is the envelope? Well, the envelope is the arc of the sound from its initial starting point, getting up to its peak amplitude, and then coming back down. Now, in a sound like a drum, which is a transient sound, or a transient-based sound, your first initial part is going to be called the attack. That is the first, loudest spike in the sound. And then the return of that sound into the resonance of the drum is called the decay. From the decay, the actual sound will resonate for a while, and that is called the sustain of a sound. And finally, the room that it is acting in will also provide some sound as well, and that is the release. These four components blend together to form the shape of a sound. If you can train your ear to hear shape, then you can train your ear to be able to manipulate shape to create the desired results that you want. And that's what a compressor is doing. Now, very quickly, I'm going to go over what a compressor is and how it works. You might know this already. It's okay. Bear with me. Doesn't hurt to review. Okay. Starting with a compressor. This is the most common type of dynamic processor. The original idea for a compressor was to keep broadcasting stations from overloading their broadcast, or to keep amplifiers from overloading and pushing the speakers too hard. The idea was to grab the signal as it gets too loud and just rein it back in so that nothing blows up. However, compression has been used for so long, we found all sorts of other crazy cool techniques for it, where once upon a time, in the inception of recording, we pretty much only used compression for the very most practical reasons. Now we use it as an artistic device as well as a technical practical device. Okay, so what does a compressor do? Well, the idea is you set an amplitude threshold. If you're working outside in hardware, then it's a dBVU type of reading. If you're inside of the software world, it's a negative dB full scale reading. Whatever it is, the bottom line is it's a point of amplitude. And when something is below it, the compressor is letting it alone. And when something is above that threshold, it exceeds the amount of allowed volume, that's when the compressor kicks in and starts to pull the signal back down. Of course, there's a wide range of ways in which this can happen. It could happen instantaneously. That would be like a limiter, where you are having a super, super fast attack. And that's right here. The attack is saying, how quickly is this gain reduction being applied? The gain reduction is going to kick in immediately, but it could do the complete gain reduction all at once, or it could gradually reduce gain. And in fact, in some devices, it might base it mathematically off of the total gain reduction to be done, and in other devices, it might have to be a fixed point of gain reduction, which is very true of a lot of analog compressors. I think the fixed point is like negative 9 dBVU or something like that. I don't really know. Bottom line is, use your ear, use your judgment, and know that what you're doing is you're affecting the speed of which gain reduction is being applied. Same thing with the release, except for in reverse. After it's pulled the level down, the variable amplifier inside of it has to change and allow that signal to come back up. And how fast that occurs is going to be based on the release. And again, there's going to be practical as well as creative uses for the release time. Then, of course, we already talked about the threshold. The ratio here is going to determine how hard the compressor is going to work. Is it going to pull the signal way down, or is it going to just kind of pull it down a little bit? And a lot of times compressors will have fixed settings, but sometimes you will have compressors where you can go to ratios that are like 1.2 to 1, where even if you're way above the threshold, you're really only doing a subtle amount of gain reduction. Or you could go the opposite direction. You could do humongous amounts, high ratios, approaching infinite to 1. Some even do infinite to 1, which would technically be clipping. And that is going to be something like a limiter, where the level never exceeds the threshold or barely exceeds the threshold by any meaningful amount. Now, there's also an interesting setting called the knee. And what a knee is going to do, if you watch this graph, is it's going to tell the compressor to start acting as you approach the threshold, not simply when you hit the threshold. So you will be applying gain reduction before you hit the threshold if you are turning the knee up. Now, of course, all of these things factor in when we're considering how to use a compressor as a creative tool. There's one other key point of compression and dynamic processing that I think people tend to misunderstand, and that is the side chain. When people say side chaining, a lot of times they think of ducking, where one sound is used to trigger the compressor that then acts on a different sound. Most commonly, the bass will be triggered by the kick. But that's only one example of how a side chain works. What a side chain literally is the side chain is a split of the initial signal that's feeding the compressor that goes directly into a detector circuit. You have your main signal that's coming in the input, being processed, and going out the output. But you have a separate signal that has been split off and is going in something called the side chain. The side chain is feeding the detector. The detector is what tells the compressor what to do. It's the brain. Now, a lot of compressors actually have a customizable side chain. You can have it split off from the main signal, or you could have some variation come in. It could be an EQ'd version of the main signal, which is a built-in side chain EQ. That's fairly common. Or it could be a sidechain with an external sidechain option, which allows you to feed whatever you want into the sidechain, which is where the ducking concept comes from. In the stock DigiDesign compressor, you have an EQable sidechain built right in. It's built right in here. And what this says is, let's say I have a drum loop, for example, and I want my compressor to react to everything except for the kick drum. Well, an easy way to do that would be to engage this low filter, this low cut filter, and turn it up 250 hertz. Everything below 250 hertz feeding into the detector circuit is now being rolled off. And so the detector circuit is going to react less to content that contains those frequencies. This is a really good way of customizing how your compressor is going to act. Now, between the attack, the release, the threshold, the ratio, the knee, the sidechain, the possibility of having an external sidechain, compression can just seem overwhelming. And that's just compression. You've also got expanders, gates, limiters, transient designers. How do you deal with all of that? Well, you go back to the initial idea of shape. That you have your attack, your decay, your sustain, your release, and that the compressor is effectively molding that shape. The expander is molding that shape. The transient designer is molding that shape. And as long as you know that you are looking for a certain sound shape, you can then use these tools to achieve that to the best of your ability. So here's a way of thinking about compression that I'm going to switch up. A lot of times when we are talking about compression, we will say this sound needs more compression, or in this sound you should add a gate. And what I am saying is that you can manipulate the sound. Instead of adding compression, you are manipulating shape. You say, oh, this could use a different shape. You're not adding compression, you're changing the shape. That's the distinction. That's what I'm going to teach you.